All right, good evening. My name is Solveig McShay, and I'm a member of the Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. And here, along with Eva Millerman and Jared Science, we're here to welcome you to tonight's conversation between David Harris and Anuja Joshi about David's new book, Antisemitism, What Everyone Needs to Know. We wanted to take a moment and thank Deb Grisham and Warren Gottlieb for suggesting that we bring David, I guess, back to Chappaqua. We feel very lucky to have community members who are so supportive of the work of Enough and the committee.
The Enough Club, which stands for Educate Now on Understanding Genocide and Hate, is honored to bring this important conversation to the community as part of our club's mission to educate and empower students to stand up against hate.
As we continue to witness anti-Semitism rising to levels we never thought we would see in our lifetime, we are honored to hear from expert David Harris. Tonight, we welcome Mr. Harris back to his hometown of Chappaqua, and we are lucky to be one of the first audiences to hear about Mr. Harris's new book, which was just released on Monday.
My name is Izzy Schlinger, and along with Haley Stern, Eve Wolfberg, Phoebe Rosenberg, Zach Eisner, Cami Weinstein, and Holocaust and Human Rights Committee member Harriet Zeller, we will be introducing our honored guests. David Harris served as CEO of the American Jewish Committee, or AJC, from 1990 to 2022. Harris was referred to by the late Israeli president and Nobel laureate Shimon Peres as the foreign minister of the Jewish people. He is the most decorated Jewish organizational leader in U.S. history and is the recipient of 4 honorary doctorates, including the most recent one in 2022 from Brandeis University.
Throughout the past 5 decades, Harris played a pivotal role in shaping critical global issues, from the rescue of Ethiopian Jewry and Soviet Jewry, including 2 detentions by Soviet authorities, to helping expand Israel's diplomatic footprint throughout the world. His contributions have been far-reaching. Harris has been committed to preserving Holocaust memory, exploring new relationships in the Arab and larger Muslim world, supporting an end to communism in Eastern Europe, advocating for NATO expansion, combating global anti-Semitism, and promoting interfaith dialogue and understanding.
David Harris is the author of several books, as well as hundreds of opinion editorials and articles on global Jewish issues in leading media outlets around the world. David Harris received his education from the University of Pennsylvania and the London School of Economics. He also served as a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University and was both a junior and senior associate at Oxford University. David Harris is the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, a dedicated husband, the father of 3 Horace Greeley graduates, and also a grandfather.
Guiding tonight's conversation is Dr. Anuja Joshi, whose life journey has been profoundly shaped by questions of human rights, belonging, and justice. Anuja has lived in Chappaqua for more than 10 years, but her story began far away.
Anuja grew up in Canada, the only country that welcomed her family when they were expelled from Uganda under Idi Amin. Along with thousands of other Asians, that experience of being a refuge, of losing a homeland, and finding refuge in another has given her a deep understanding of both the pain of exclusion and the power of acceptance.
Having lived all over the world, Anuja brings a global perspective to tonight's discussion. Her own journey reminds us that the fight against hatred and prejudice, whether anti-Semitism, racism, or any form of bigotry, is not abstract. It is real lives, real people, real families, and the universal human right to dignity and belonging.
It is in this spirit that she joins us tonight as moderator, helping us explore the urgent themes of this book and guiding a conversation that speaks to the heart of our shared humanity. Please welcome David Harris and Anuja Joshi.
Good evening, everyone. It is a privilege to welcome you to the launch of David Harris's powerful new book, Antisemitism, What Everyone Needs to Know. Tonight, we are not only celebrating the release of an important work, but also confronting one of humanity's oldest and most persistent social diseases, anti-Semitism. As David reminds us, anti-Semitism is like a shape-shifting villain. It adapts, reappears in new disguises, and finds fresh ways to divide societies. It has been called the world's oldest hatred for good reason. From ancient conspiracy theories to racial pseudoscience, from political scapegoating to online misinformation, anti-Semitism has evolved across centuries, leaving devastation in its wake. But this book is not only about exposing darkness, it is about shining a light. David challenges us to see anti-Semitism not as a parochial Jewish issue, but as a universal human rights concern that threatens democracy, equality, and the dignity of all people. Combating it requires more than saying never again. It requires understanding its roots, recognizing its modern guises, and taking action to build a world where no one lives in fear because of who they are. So we begin this conversation. Let's treat this evening not just as a book launch, but as a call to action, a chance to deepen our understanding, to challenge complacency, a chance to recommit ourselves to standing against hatred in all its forms. Before I start, I just wanted to inform the audience that David will be taking questions at the end of our conversation, and he will be signing books in the conference room after we conclude, and books are available for purchase. David, your book begins by defining anti-Semitism and even points out that the way we spell the word carries meaning. Why does language matter so much in shaping how people understand anti-Semitism? And how is this hatred adapted across history, from religious prejudice to racial classification, and now into modern political and digital forms?
I always hope the first question is a softball. But if I can just take a second, hello, Chappaqua. My family spent 25 wonderful years here. There were some friends and former neighbors who were here, so a special shout out. And all three of our children graduated from Greeley, having been to West Orchard and Bell, when Bell was the only middle school. It's always nice to be back. Even for a somewhat dispiriting occasion like a book on anti-Semitism. Anuja, you in a sense began to lay the groundwork for the discussion. Anti-Semitism did not actually have the name anti-Semitism until the 19th century. Before that, there were various names in various languages. There were various individuals who evoked the anti-Semitism of the time. Think about characters from William Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, that endured. But the first attempt to give it that name was in the 19th century in Germany, and it was hyphenated. So what happened with the hyphen? Why did it become such an issue, Anuja? Because Arabs claimed that they too were classified as Semitic people. Therefore, anti-Semitism was not unique and specific to the Jews, whatever the original intention might be. And therefore, ipso facto, by definition, Arabs could not be anti-Semitic. Do you follow the logic? If they themselves were Semites, and we're talking about anti-Semites, anti-Semitism, by definition, they were exempted from any accusation of anti-Semitism. And that was, frankly, too cheap and easy, because as elsewhere in the world, in other civilizations and communities, there was anti-Semitism, including in the Arab world. I can speak very personally about it through the lens of my wife, who was a survivor from Libya. It's a different conversation. So some of us, myself included, chose to eliminate the hyphen. So in a sense, we've eliminated the notion of Semitic peoples with Semitic languages in order to, if you will, monopolize the term anti-Semitism. Others, however, Anuja, say, wait, maybe there are other ways of expressing this that are more expressive. Jew hatred, hyphenated. Judeophobia. But that gets us into the weeds a bit and away from the central issue, which is why now, and most importantly, as you said, the call to action, what do we do about it?
Thank you. If anti-Semitism has been with us for so long, 19th century, you said, with the hyphen, what's striking is not only its persistence, but the way it keeps reinventing itself. You describe anti-Semitism as an infinitely adaptable conspiracy theory. How has this ability to disguise itself, sometimes across political discourse or cultural critique, allowed it to persist across cultures and eras? And what strategies can help us recognize and confront these subtler forms without stifling free speech or legitimate debate?
These are pitches from the Los Angeles Dodgers. There's no easy hit here. What to do about it is a separate discussion, and for me, the most essential part of the conversation, Anuja. But what's remarkable about anti-Semitism is, first of all, its, let's call it durability, its resilience, its ingenuity, its adaptability, its creativity. That's first. Think conspiracy theories. Think, not centuries ago, think days and weeks ago. Charlie Kirk is assassinated. How long did it take before there was the theory that somehow Israel or the Jews or the Mossad or the IDF or some combination were responsible? Think to COVID. Think to economic travails. Think to social malaise. Whenever people are somehow discomfited, dislocated, uneasy, unsure, they have an off-the-shelf explanation. It's too challenging to actually dig deeper. It's so much simpler. And the point is, Anuja, that because of these millennia of anti-Semitism in multiple guises, there is a large segment of the world population, I believe, that is absolutely ready at any moment in time to embrace the theory. Because after all, if the core of the theory is Jews are manipulative, malevolent, malicious, then it makes perfect sense. The second kind of remarkable aspect for me is the inherent contradictions, none of which prevent the progression of this social pathology. Think today. The far left sees Jews as the poster children for white privilege. Split screen. Other side of the screen, white nationalists marching in Charlottesville a few years ago, shouting, "The Jews will not replace us." Where does that language come from? From Nazi Germany. Just translated from German into English. So at one and the same time, let's say half the anti-Semitism crowd sees those of us who are Jewish as the ultimate evil because we embody white privilege, white supremacy, and the other half of the crowd despises us because they see us as poisoning the white race in the spirit of Nazi Germany, and, to adapt to today's language, being the authors of the Great Replacement Theory. Think Tree of Life, the synagogue in Pittsburgh where 11 people were killed. The perpetrator, who was angry at HIAS, a Jewish migration agency, alleging that they were largely responsible for bringing non-white people into the United States in order to replace the white population. Or take another split screen. For half the world's anti-Semites, those on the far left, we embody all of the evils of capitalism. And the image of the Rothschild family is all over the anti-Semitism story for centuries. For the other half, on the right, we embody Karl Marx, Bolshevism, Trotskyism. So a rational person might say, well, wait a second, you can't be both the embodiment of white privilege and at the same time be poisoning the white race. Even if you're malevolent and manipulative and malicious, that's a step too far. And you can't be both Rothschild and Marx. But in the world of anti-Semitism, you absolutely can. And here I invoke a quote, if I get it right, from Jonathan Swift, who authored Gulliver's Travels some time ago. It was not directed at the Jews, but is perfectly suited to this moment. You cannot rationally talk someone out of a position that they did not rationally gain in the first place. So those who want to rationally talk to the anti-Semites, who are accusing Jews of spreading COVID or of assassinating Charlie Kirk or of manipulating the weather in Washington, D.C. or California, or starting wars for material gain, the notion that the strategy is to respond sanely on Twitter with well-conceived tweets or with clever billboards on the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel might well be misplaced, because you're talking rationally to people who've not come to their own views rationally, because rationally they're irrational. They're totally irrational. So I come back to, as we proceed, where do we go from here?
And that is such the question is, where do we go from here? So part of the challenge, of course, is not just recognizing anti-Semitism in its new disguises, but making sure the lessons of the past don't fade from memory. Holocaust education has long been central to combating anti-Semitism, yet now we face denial, distortion, and what some call Holocaust fatigue. How can educators and institutions keep these lessons alive and relevant for younger generations, inspiring not remembrance, but action against hatred? In addition to that, after what you were talking about, even if we do all this education, if those people can't be reached rationally, how can they be reached? Or do we just reach the numbers we can reach, and that way their volume is made less?
Well, there goes the rest of the evening. As the student said, both of my parents are survivors. I'm the first person in my entire extended family born in the United States. So for me, Holocaust memory is not a hobby. It's not an add-on. It's very much central to who I am and to how I view the world. But I also understand, Anuja, that we're fighting a number of counter tides, if you will. Number one, simply the passage of time. I'm not comparing or contrasting, but when I went to high school, my Greeley graduate kids loved to tease me and say, "In the last century, Dad." You know, when we studied the Crimean War or even the First World War, they were very detached intellectually, much less personally. So I did what I had to do to get by in the class. So the passage of time, the passing of the survivors, the passing of the liberators, the passing of the eyewitnesses, the passing of what we call in Hebrew the Hasidei Umot Ha'olam, the righteous among the nations. And I want to come back to them as well, those who risk their own lives to save others, because therein, I think, lies an answer. Maybe the answer, but certainly an answer. We're also up against a new kind of educational mindset in which there's a victimization Olympics. And suddenly, the singularity of the Holocaust, certainly not as the only tragedy that befell the world, but a very unique tragedy, indeed for which a new name had to be created. Early in the war, as Winston Churchill received reports of what was happening to the Jews, he was quoted as saying, "This is a crime without a name." Along came Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer who had managed to survive and who took from both Latin and Greek roots that combined to make the word genocide. That's how unique and singular the machinery of genocide, the alphabet of genocide. A for Auschwitz to Z for Zyklon B. That's how unique it was. Now, in most settings, if you only teach about the Holocaust, you're going to get a storm of criticism. What about all the other tragedies in the world? And even more, to politicize it? And what about the, as the Palestinians call it, their Nakba, which they try to frame as their Holocaust, which they want in the school systems. And then you have the involvement, shall we say, Anuja, which I think happened here, and I want to especially call out and thank Deb Grishman, one of the organizers, who alerted us to the fact that this school system was apparently using the Choices program in K through 12, until it was discovered through some efforts in which I was involved that that was not such a benign, innocent curriculum. It had footprints of Qatari funding. It had the imprimatur of Brown University, which gave it a certain acceptance. But Qatar was not an innocent funder. It had an agenda. And the agenda was to shape the way your children or grandchildren and mine view the world, and especially the Middle East, K through 12, not even waiting for university. So how do we navigate all of these and way more challenges in talking about the Holocaust, especially when, and here I'll enter into, again, the politics of the day, the enemies of Israel very consciously, very strategically, very deliberately, are invoking images of the Holocaust to portray their situation. genocide, starvation, apartheid, targeting of children, making the Gaza Strip in their iconography the new Warsaw Ghetto, and the IDF the new Wehrmacht, if not the SS. A total historical inversion, but very consciously done. So in all of this, how do you teach about the Holocaust in the year 2025? And I'll add one more challenge, which we began to see already 20 years ago or so, Anuja. In Europe, there's a book in French edited by a French teacher. The English translation of the book is The Lost Territories of the Republic. The Republic meaning France, the French Republic. And it was about the difficulty, if not impossibility, of teachers in many French schools, especially in what they call the banlieue, the suburbs, which is a code name for the immigrant populations, who resisted the nationally mandated curriculum on the Holocaust. And in France, it's nationally mandated. And pushed back, and there are examples, many in the book, of students pushing back, students from the Arab world, students from Africa, students from elsewhere saying, there was no Holocaust. The Jews invented the Holocaust to create a sympathy for Israel, or for themselves, or both. And in many cases, teachers ideologically agreed with them, but even if they didn't agree with them, were often intimidated in the classroom. We're not talking now about K1 or first or second grades, but in the high school. And you may remember a man named Samuel Paty, who was murdered and beheaded as a teacher in a French school for simply talking about how some portrayed Muhammad. So this is not just, will the teacher be reprimanded? These have become life and death issues in some places. So how to deal with it, and especially in the United States, where every school district is sovereign and unique in so many respects. So you want to talk about how to teach the Holocaust in Chappaqua, great. And you feel you've made some inroads, wonderful. But then what about Pleasantville? and what about Briarcliff? And keep going and cross the country. These are not simple issues. So I don't have the one-size-fits-all answers, Anuja, to the question, but I do know that simply trying to teach it in the classical way, as we move further and further away from the Holocaust itself, as we rely on second and third generation, and as we enter into victimization politics, and also politicization of history in a very profound way, smart minds need to be thinking about how to do this differently. Doing it the same way won't work. We see it. It won't work. How to do it differently, I think, is the challenge for groups like this, for the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in Westchester County, and for others across the country who laudably, nobly grapple with these issues.
I feel so strongly about how you said in Chappaqua we have many people who understand and who listen, who come out to our programs, but for true education to happen, we have to reach those people who don't know, or who are not. How do you make people not willing to listen? That's another part of it. But I think if it can be standardized education everywhere, even if you don't want to learn it, you have to learn it. It's like math.
Well, when you mention history to many, they already roll the eyes. If you add math to the equation, they're running for the exits. But I would suggest, at least from my perspective, that there are five enduring lessons of the Holocaust which transcend time and space. And also, by the way, transcend, let's call it, parochial Jewish concerns that are every bit as valid for everyone else in the classroom. Number one, a failure of imagination. I could go through a whole collection of 3x5 index cards, and I have lots of them, of some of the great people in the world, some of the great institutions in the world. 4 British prime ministers, Canadian prime minister, French prime minister, the New York Times, journalists like Walter Lippmann, scholars like Harold Lasky. I mean, these were top names in the world, all of whom failed to understand Adolf Hitler and Nazi intentions beginning in 1923, 1924, when Hitler was in the Landsberg fortress, where he wrote Mein Kampf. And even when he came to power in 1933, they totally underestimated him. Why is it relevant today? Because I submit, and it's very relevant to where I live today, which is no longer Random Farms, but the east side of Manhattan. Most Americans are incapable of understanding an extremist mindset. Most Americans have the belief, it's very noble, but it's misguided, that at the end of the day, we're all the same. We all want the same thing. Maybe we express it differently. But you know, when you see a mother in Gaza who tells a CNN or BBC journalist, I'm proud of the fact that 3 or 4 or 5 of my children have been martyred, quote unquote, and I'm going to go home and get pregnant to bring another martyr into the world, I would say there's a fork in the road between most of us and others. Hitler meant what he said. The fact that Walter Lippmann and Harold Lasky and David Lloyd George and Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain and Edward Daladier and others chose not to believe him was not because Hitler hid his intentions, but it's because they couldn't grasp the mindset. So when Iran, for example, says for year after year after year, we want a world without Israel, I believe them. Others slough it off. No, they don't mean it. It's just Iranian hyperbole. I believe them. They're saying what they mean. Number 2, the failure of appeasement. Many of you are in business or in the law. You negotiate for a living. You're a little more muscular at times, you're a little softer at times, but in many cases you understand that both parties want a deal. And both parties will bend, a little more, a little less. So you can negotiate between countries that have something perhaps in common, a desire not to go to war. But what happened with Nazi Germany was the misplaced belief that you could negotiate your way to a 50-yard line with Adolf Hitler and company, illustrated above all by Czechoslovakia. Sometimes it doesn't work. The third lesson, and again, as you see, these are not Jewish, qua-Jewish lessons. The third lesson is the fragility of democracy. You know, in the sweep of human history, recorded human history, liberal democracy as we know it is a blip on the screen. Why do we make the cavalier assumption that because it was here yesterday, it will necessarily be here tomorrow and in exactly the way that we expect it to be? The Weimar Republic was a messy democracy. but a democracy nonetheless between 1919 and 1933. It collapsed overnight. And instead, the nation that was widely viewed as the most educated, the most civilized, the most cultured on earth, descended into the depths of darkness. And lesson for the classroom, Anuja? Yes, 6 million Jews were murdered. 2/3 of European Jewry, 1/3 of global Jewry, and we still have not recovered demographically. But more than 60 million people died because of the failure of imagination and the failure of appeasement, which means at least 54 million were not Jews. They were civilians, they were gay, they were social democrats, they were trade unionists, they were Slavs, as the Germans called them, Untermenschen, people not full human beings. So every generation has to assume that we become the guardians of liberal democracy. Number 4, would World War II have unfolded in the same way if the United States had asserted its support for Britain and France and confronted Germany early on? How about when Germany violated Versailles and returned to the Rhineland and militarized the Rhineland and violated the Washington Naval Conference and built more naval ships than it was allowed to build? And how about when Germany tilted the scales in the Spanish Civil War? And how about when Germany launched the Anschluss and occupied Austria? I can keep going. America was neutral. America believed that an ocean would keep us away from, God help us, a second return to Europe to save Europe from itself after the First World War. It's one of those imponderable questions. But again, back to politics, if you will, not partisan politics. An isolationist or neo-isolationist America is a recipe for global catastrophe for anyone who cares about human rights, human freedom, and human dignity. And I don't say that blind to the fact that America is fully capable of making mistakes. And America is not able to be everywhere for everyone, nor should it be. But on the major defining issues of our time, between good and evil, liberty and despotism, we need America. And the 5th lesson, maybe some will say it's more parochial to the Jews, so be it, was the absence of Israel. In 1938, we'll mark it in just a few days, Kristallnacht exploded in both Germany and Austria. Jews could still leave. Wasn't easy. They had to give up everything, but they could still leave. And Hitler teased the world and essentially said, bitte, you care so much about the Jews? Take them. Even before Kristallnacht in July of 1938, there was the Evian Conference of 32 governments, including the United States, and 31 of the 32 governments would not accept any additional refugees. They wouldn't even call them Jews, by the way. They were frightened of stoking domestic anti-Semitism, those refugees. So by November, 4 months later, Hitler understood whatever they might say in a press release about Hitler's attacks on the Jews, they were unprepared to lift a finger. Why do I mention Israel? Because there would have been no need for the Evian Conference had there been Israeli embassies and consulates in Paris and in The Hague and in Brussels and in Bucharest and in Warsaw and in Sofia and in Athens. There would have been no need. So some people want to politicize every discussion of Israel. I simply want to say as a practical matter, that had there been a sovereign Israel with authority over its own right to entry, the Jews who were trapped in Europe, including my mother and father, would not have been going from one consulate to another, as my mother did in the south of France, begging for a visa, but not rich enough to bribe the people who were demanding exorbitant amounts and who ended up in hiding for 17 months until they were able to cross the Pyrenees Mountains. That's the true meaning of Israel in the contemporary sense, and I'm not even touching the biblical, spiritual, religious, and metaphysical sense of Israel. Those are the 5 lessons, Anuja. And if I were overseeing a Holocaust education program, I would want to be sure that some variation of those lessons were taught to the students. Will they all accept it? Probably not. But hey, you do what you can with the material you have and trying to reach as many students as you possibly can. Sorry for the long answer, but it was a long question.
And it was an amazing answer. In fact, we have a few more minutes, and he finished all my index cards. So the long.
This is all unscripted.
Yes, my index cards, no. But you had specifically said in the book about the canary in the coal mine, and how treatment of Jews is a reflection of what could be for the whole population, for all peoples. And to ignore that is foolish. And we need to be aware of that. We need to educate people on that this is something that has been going on and on in history. And yet we all seem, not we, but people seem to turn a blind eye. But that being said, now to something slightly different. So from Holocaust denial to the rise of anti-Zionism. Anti-Semitism takes different forms across regions and political contexts. How can we distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel, as you said in your book, as it goes to politics, versus rhetoric that crosses into anti-Semitism? And what role do frameworks like the IHRA definition play in guiding that conversation?
So I was all teed up to answer the first part of your question, not realizing that you were pivoting. So I'll maybe people want to come back to it. This is a question that many have wrestled with, I think most successfully Natan Sharansky, if you know his name. The Soviet prisoner of conscience who spent 9 years in the Gulag. Actually, he and Nelson Mandela became the 2 probably most famous political prisoners in their era. And somewhere in the early 2000s, after the wicked UN-sponsored conference in Durban, South Africa, that was allegedly focusing on combating racism, and which turned, in many respects, into literally an anti-Semitic hate fest. Read what the late Congressman Tom Lantos wrote about it. Read what the former Attorney General of Canada, Irwin Cotler, wrote about it. Natan Sharansky said we need to find a way of distinguishing legitimate criticism from something very different and much more inimical. And he came up with the 3 Ds, and I write about it in the book. The 3 Ds are double standards, demonization, and delegitimization. So, very briefly, though I do a disservice to Sharansky, the delegitimization is the one I'll illustrate for you. Think of everything we've seen the last 2 years on campuses and elsewhere, from the river to the sea, globalize the Intifada, end the occupation. All of those slogans and many more are not pointing towards a peaceful conflict resolution between the Palestinian people and the state of Israel. None of those slogans speaks of a 2-state settlement. which most people believe at the end of the day, with all of its challenges, is perhaps the only possible solution. Maybe not today, but at some point. But of the 193 UN member states, only one has its very legitimacy questioned day after day after day. Please name for me a second UN member state. The only other nation I can think of which is not a UN member state, by the way, is Taiwan. But at least until now, Taiwan has not faced the kind of eliminationist, yes, genocidal efforts to actually destroy it, annihilate it. So Sharansky says, if you're singly focusing on Israel's legitimacy, as if it has no basis whatsoever, and ignoring every other nation on earth, as if they automatically have legitimacy, although I'll whisper to this audience, exactly what legitimacy do most nations have other than the fact that they exist? The United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Much of my work was in Latin America. I rarely, if ever, met an indigenous president, prime minister, foreign minister of a Latin American nation. They were all European. Why? How about the countries of North Africa? My wife is from Libya. There's a lady here whose family, her parents are from Libya. Why exactly is Libya an Arab country? Why exactly is Libya a Muslim country? Why are Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia? Do we ever stop to think about this? They were invaded in the 7th century. They were conquered, they were colonized, they were occupied. So if we want to go down the legitimacy road, let's declare that there probably are very few, if any, nations on earth that have legitimacy in the purest definition of legitimacy. But in the imperfect world, Israel's legitimacy, I'll put it up against most nations on earth. From the Hebrew Bible, from archaeology, all the way through the Balfour Declaration, the League of Nations, San Remo Conference, UN Resolution 181 in 1947, which endorsed the partition plan and specifically spoke of a Jewish state and an Arab state. One side accepted, one side rejected. So that's what Sharansky's talking about. You don't like the current prime minister? Fine. Half of Israel doesn't. You don't like the current political party in power? Fine. Haaretz talks about it every day on the front page. Fine. That's different. But when you're saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you're actually saying that a UN member state that has been a member since 1949 has no right to exist, period, full stop. And that's where legitimate criticism, according to Sharansky, and many will agree with him, bleeds into something very different, the desire to eliminate the Jewish state. And I need to add one more thing, Anuja, and I'm sorry for long answers. One of the things that really hit me between the eyes in this book, not that I didn't know it, but when you spend hours and hours, day after day after day, there's a kind of both loneliness but intimacy between you and the subject matter. It's very different than being out and about, traveling, meeting with Jewish communities, meeting with governments, meeting with civil society. And what have I seen? So many of the long-standing tropes about Jews, from the religious period, from the racial period, are being used today, not necessarily against those of us in this room who are Jews, but against the state of Israel. Think about it. The blood libel, one of the most malicious of all anti-Semitic events, repeated time and again from William of Norwich in the 13th century through the Mendel Bellis trial that Saul Bellow made famous in his book, The Fixer, and lots in between. It was the notion that individual Jews thirsted for superior Christian blood, for the baking of matzah on the eve of Passover. Now what do you see? Israel being almost gleefully, ecstatically accused of deliberately targeting children, Palestinian children, in order to wipe them out. Or another example, we thought that the deicide charge had ended in 1965 with the Second Vatican Council, exonerating the Jews of eternal guilt and punishment for the alleged murder of the Son of God. I could show you cartoons from the Spanish press in recent days and weeks of the Palestinian child in the kafiyah nailed to the cross. Reawakening old, centuries-long tropes that caused so much damage to Jews. And here they are now being superimposed on Israel. The first victims of genocide, Raphael Lemkin, are now, we're told, the perpetrators of genocide. The script is being flipped in front of our eyes very consciously and very deliberately, and I have to tell you, some otherwise well-intentioned people are falling into the intellectual and linguistic trap. And one last thing, Anuja, because I need to come back to what you said at the beginning. In a way, I'm meeting Anuja for the first time, but I earlier asked a little bit about her life. You're seeing, in a way, two sides of the same coin that we're talking about. It's not for me to speak about her life. But in 1972, I was a graduate student in Britain. And I began reading about the roundup and expulsion of Indians, Asians from Idi Amin's Uganda. I didn't know until today, meeting Anuja, that she and her family were among those estimated 60,000 or so people expelled. They were expelled because Idi Amin and his entourage didn't like their economic success, didn't like the fact that this group of people who were seen as the other, not as the native, even though they had lived for generations and helped build the country. He didn't like that fact. They were still the other. And overnight they were expelled. And by the way, from that day forward, Uganda went downhill. She was the other. By the way, 4 years later, the Air France plane was hijacked to where? Uganda. Same leader, Idi Amin. And this time, because there were no Asians for him to target on the plane, he joined in the targeting of the Israeli and Jewish kidnapped. Jews were the other. In countries like Poland and Ukraine, Indians were the other. We were targeted for our success. We were maligned for our otherness. And this is why, to me, there are few other peoples on earth that need to know each other better and forge closer ties than the Indian community and the Jewish community. And this was not scripted, but I think this helps illustrate why.
Thank you, David, for your wise words. I could do this all night. David said he doesn't have anywhere to go afterwards, but I know you probably do. Aw, you can always come back. But we need to move on slightly and get some questions from the audience. I know the Enough students are going to do that for us. Actually, Ali, you want to give your mic to Dr. Glassman?
I hope someone could see. Oh, that's a little better.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Harris, thank you so very much for another wonderful evening. If I'm not mistaken, also, November 5th is the anniversary of the kicking out or the starting of the Holocaust in Libya. Many, many years ago when they moved people out of Libya, I think they started it on November 5th. And I'm happy to have you here. I'm sorry to remind you.
The irony, Dr. Glassman, is if the Jews of Libya had not been expelled, I would never have married. So I have conflicting allegiances. Am I grateful that they were expelled so I can meet my future wife and have 3 wonderful children that we could raise in Chappaqua? Or am I angry for yet another pogrom against the Jews?
That is always in front of us. The reason why I have a question is today, it's coming to the end of the year, everybody's asking for donations.
Not me.
Not you, but all these legacy, I hope you get at least one. The legacy charities for Jews, known by all of us, from the AJC, the UJA, etc., all have very large coffers and are all, quotation marks, fighting and telling us how much they're fighting anti-Semitism. Are any of them, or which one of them, do you consider, without having to dispel anything, how do you consider their effects, which I think is slim, and are there any that you think are more successful than others?
I think I should have stuck with Anuja's tough questioning. So I'll be very blunt, and I'll be blunt because I think there's a war going on, Dr. Glassman, and it's not just facing Israel. There's a global war going on facing Jews and others who identify with and stand up for Israel and believe in Zionism, which is nothing more or less than the belief that Jews should have the right to self-determination. What people are advocating for the Palestinians or for others is no more or no less than the essential meaning of Zionism. So if you're still with me, that there is a war, and the war is intensifying globally, and the evidence of it is everywhere we look. Don't believe me, look at the official statistics of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada, in the United States, in New York City, in Britain, in France, wherever statistics are found. I'll just give you one. The FBI recently said that nearly 70% of all religiously based hate crimes in the United States are targeted at 2.4% of the population, Jews. And no other group is even in the double digits. That doesn't mean, therefore, that we don't have concern for the other groups, but when 70% are focused on my tribe, I'm going to ask very different questions of Jewish organizations, perhaps, than before. I want to know not about output. Jewish organizations are brilliant at selling output. Here are the meetings we had. Here are pictures of the meetings. Here are the press releases we issued. Here are the tweets we posted. They even got 14 likes. Look at that. Here are the trips we've taken. Fine. Are they the end of the story, or are they the means to a different ending? I want to know not about output. I want to know about outcome. And Jewish donors like yourself, I'm sure there are some in this audience, I think need to become a little bit wiser and maybe take a cue from Cy Sims. Anyone remember him? What was the slogan? An educated consumer is our best customer. And I would say that philanthropists, donors, whether at this level or this level or this level, need to start asking much tougher questions about outcomes. Because the fact of the matter is, the problem is getting worse, not better. So whatever groups are doing, and I don't question, Dr. Glassman, the good intentions. But where is the October 8th strategy for an October 8th world? I've asked that question on my weekly television show since October the 8th. Where is the October 8th strategy? If there's a war, where's the war council? Where are the strategists? Who are our leaders? What are we doing differently? And let's dial back to yesterday. Because the lessons of yesterday are so, as my kids would say, products of Greeley, remember, ginormous. Not sure it was an SAT word, but I bought it. 50% of New York voters, exactly 50% of New York voters, were either inspired by or unbothered by a candidate who has been associated repeatedly, I would say fanatically. By the way, he himself has spoken about his obsession with the Palestinian issue since high school. He is the one who created the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at Bowdoin College, and Students for Justice in Palestine is not a peace-seeking, two-state seeking organization. It's what I spoke about earlier. He is supportive of BDS against Israel, but not against any other nation I know of. He singularly speaks about his unwillingness to recognize the Jewish character of Israel. How about the several dozen countries which have Islam as an official religion, and those countries which have Christianity, even the cross, as part of their flag, their iconography? And all of this happened, Dr. Glassman, in a city with the largest Jewish population in the world outside the state of Israel. So if Jewish organizations don't think that something very fundamental has changed, I mean seismically, titanically changed, I want to know as a donor, do you share my understanding? I want to see the war plan, and I want to be convinced that it's succeeding or has a chance to succeed. Don't feed me the output. I'm only interested in outcomes. So that's the filter I would use. And by that filter, I'm happy to talk to you privately. There are very few organizations I know today. I think, much as I hate to say it, we actually need a brand new organization. I hate to say it because I lived in the Jewish world and I always complained there were too many organizations. And now I'm saying in this new world, the existing organizations can't pivot quickly enough. They're much too slow in pivoting. There are too many vested interests. Staff, lay leadership, donors, restricted giving. They're not nimble enough. They're too caught up in the fact that some will not discuss the Muslim Brotherhood because they fear charges of Islamophobia, because they think that the Muslim Brotherhood must, by definition, linguistically, be an Islamic version of B'nai B'rith or a Greek fraternity. I know of such organizations. I know organizations that will not call out Qatar, which is the funding source for so much of what we're facing, because they think they have a privileged relationship with the Qatari consular official or first secretary in Washington, D.C. or at the United Nations. I know of organizations that won't rethink their alliances because they're still clinging to old alliances in which they invested so heavily, but on October 7th, those so-called alliances disappeared and haven't returned. So, to me, there's so much at stake here. And fundamentally, yes, I'm going to personalize it. I've had a great life. Born in America, as I mentioned, the first. a very privileged life, an unobstructed life as an American and as a Jew. My 3 children had an even more privileged and unobstructed life as Americans and as Jews. I know for a fact that my 8 Jewish grandchildren will not have the same opportunity. I've already seen it, a couple have experienced it, and they're not even 10 years old yet. So my bottom line question is, this is too serious to try and snooker me with your pictures of meetings and photo opportunities and tweets, because if you're not protecting my 8 Jewish grandchildren and their future in this country, then who the hell is?
Haley?
You mentioned that symbols like the yellow star existed long before the Holocaust. Why do these symbols keep resurfacing, and what can we learn from that?
Well, the first thing is we need you off the crutches, because we need a strong team, right? So full steam ahead. Because they take on a life of their own. Because people don't have to invent new images if they can draw upon old images that seem to work. You know, at the end of the day, what are these images all about? They're all about basically 2 things. They're all about identification, right? Put the Star of David, that yellow Jude, the German Star of David on me, and the whole world knows I'm a Jew. And the second, humiliation, because the whole world knows I'm a Jew. Why invent something new that may or may not have the same resonance when you have these tried and tested methods that work? By the way, in the Islamic world, they used bells. Some used yellow stars, but they used bells. They used triangular hats. But the yellow star seems to be the most enduring, maybe because the Nazis used it and that spread it perhaps more than anything else. So yeah. Without wishing to discriminate, can we make sure that the students who raise their hands also get an opportunity, if possible?
Hi, Greeley High School product also, class of 1987. Let me see if I can articulate this well. I'm overwhelmed with your presence here. Go ahead, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, if you graduate from Greeley, you can articulate it. That's all I meant to say.
I feel very strongly what you said before, everything that you said. And I feel that you being here today after the election in New York City yesterday is serendipitous. But I also feel a little bit like an insane person because I have only a few like-minded people that I have conversations with about the direction that our city, state, country, the world is going. Debbie Grishman being one of them. We commiserate together all the time. I am not sure how to express my concerns to everyone else as eloquently as you did so that people will wake up and see what's happening. I'm fearful that where we are now, November 5th, 2025, we'll look back on this time 5, 8, 10 years from now when we are in another situation that Germany and Europe was in the 30s and 40s. I don't know if I'm exaggerating. I don't know if I'm losing my mind. But that's how I feel. That's the direction I feel we're headed in. And I don't know how to make even my Jewish friends understand what's going on. I'm just angry and upset and terrified about the direction we're going in right now, and I don't know what to do about it.
That's a familiar statement because that's my pillow talk every night from my wife. And those of you who know my wife, Michelle and Judah Krausar are here, and Deb, you're the age of our oldest son, Danny, but you were in our home and you met my wife. That's literally every day, to the point where my wife wrote a published piece 2 or 3 months ago called You Can't Be Anti-Israel and Still Be My Friend. It was published in a wonderful site called Future of Jewish, which it doesn't cost anything to subscribe. Joshua Hoffman is the founder. I think it's terrific. Maybe you can find it, or the organizers perhaps can circulate it to the people who are here. You can't be my friend. But that's not good enough, because we've already lost half our family and most of our friends. I think part of the answer is when you're with those people, before you speak, listen. Not everyone reaches their current mindset along the same highway. And it can be difficult to listen because there's so much you want to say, and my gosh, these days we're overloaded with emotions and feelings and facts. But I've learned, at least in my own personal and professional life, that it can be extremely insightful to take a deep breath and say, to your neighbor or whoever you're thinking about, I see that, whatever. Could you help me understand why? For example, to show you the bubble I live in, I wanted very much to have that conversation with a Mamdani supporter in New York City. I never did, because there was no one that I knew, or that our 3 adult children, even our son who lives in the East Village, which has to be Mamdani Central, even their own friends at this point have been so self-selected, because I begged my children, introduce me to a Mamdani supporter. I promise you I'll behave. I promise you I will be respectful. I want to understand the mindset, that what leads someone who is presumably well-educated, because the less well-educated all voted for Cuomo, if you look at the exit polls. The highest number of Mamdani supporters came from young women, well-educated young women. So I want to know, is it because he hates Israel? Is it because he's young and Cuomo looks old and tired? Is it because all your information comes from TikTok? Is it because you believe that socialism can work? Is it because you really have a challenge of affordability and it's genuine and you don't see anyone else talking about it? And then I would at least try to tailor how I respond based on a little bit of, as they say, intel. I know something. Has nothing to do with Israel. It has to do with affordability. It has to do with free childcare, or because the person I'm talking to can't afford childcare. Okay, very legitimate. But if you don't listen, you don't have the intel, you're basically talking to the mirror. And that's not going to work. There are some people in the world who have huge platforms. There are others of us who have to do this retail one by one by one. And I'm urging those like you and my wife and others, do it one by one, and begin by maybe raising a question, opening a little space. Too often we live in political and ideological gated communities in America. Not just residential gated communities in Florida. I'm talking about intellectual gated communities, political gated communities. We don't want to hear another point of view. When my wife was in the building gym, she would surf between MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. And I can't tell you the number of times neighbors would say, "Are you out of your mind? Either why you're watching MSNBC, or why you're watching Fox, or why you're watching CNN." And she says, as an immigrant to this country, because I'm an American, and because large numbers of Americans follow each of these stations, and I need to know what they're saying. Doesn't mean I have to agree. But I'm not going to shut it out. It doesn't mean that if I hate what Rachel Maddow represents, she's always wrong. Or if I like what Victor Davis Hanson says, he can't also be wrong. Whatever happened to the great center? Whatever happened to serious debates? Whatever happened to Chautauqua, that concept in America? It's gone. Help us restore it. And in that meeting place, maybe we can open some minds smartly.
Thank you, David, and thank you, audience, for all these wonderful questions. I think we have to move on, unfortunately. Oh, one more.
One more, Howie? Casey, one more? I'll probably regret it.
I'm in agreement with most everything you said. So, and very much in agreement with the woman who just spoke very eloquently. Thank you. David, I've seen you speak many times, and I've gone to a lot of these anti-Semitism meetings and discussions, and it's something that, as a Jew, as my mother was a Holocaust survivor, I've taken to heart.
Where is she from?
Hungary.
Hungary, where my father was born.
And my father was born there as well. But what I can't help but notice, like when you brought up Mondani's victory last night, a third of Jews actually voted for him. And when I read this, it blows my mind. I mean, I can't wrap my arms around it. As someone who is politically involved, as I think I am, I can't understand the mindset where Jews can support their own mode of destruction, which is what I think that people who support Mondani from CARE, from the Muslim Brotherhood, from all these organizations, certainly have the destruction of Israel in their charter, as Hamas does. So the question I have is that for many years, Jewish organizations have focused on anti-Semitism coming from only one political direction, the American political left. When clearly, the American political right, I'm sorry. Clearly, since October 7, it has manifested itself so that the brunt of anti-Semitism is coming from two circles, the political left and Islamic circles. And they've joined together, this whole intersectionality.
They call it the Red-Green Alliance.
Yes, this intersectionality business. So, David, the question I really have is, have Jewish leadership come to the realization finally that the left, in cahoots with the radical Islamic interests, pose the biggest threat to us, and we're seeing it now in City Hall in New York?
I'm going to be unfair, Anuja, and use the last question to make a closing statement as well. If you have to leave, of course I understand, but the doors are locked. So, all by pre-design with my friends over here. I don't mean to quote myself. Usually, people in Washington,
please,
make an art form of quoting themselves, but. I've been saying for many years, long before October 7th, a couple of things. Number one, if you're serious about anti-Semitism, you need to be swivel-headed. Remember the word, swivel-headed. That means 360 degrees. It doesn't mean you get to choose your favorite anti-Semites. When Jews were killed in the kosher shop in Jersey City, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib immediately tweeted, "White supremacy kills." But then it was revealed that so-called black Hebrews, who thought they were the authentic Jews and these Jews were imposters, were the perpetrators. Rashida Tlaib deleted, but not before it was photographed. And we never heard from Rashida Tlaib again about those anti-Semitic perpetrators. They weren't of interest to her. They didn't fit the narrative. I can offer it on all sides here. If we're serious about anti-Semitism, you have to call it out wherever it comes from, with equal anger and equal outrage. That's number one. And number two, for some Jews and non-Jews, it's very instinctively easy to identify the far right because they make it easy, because they march down the center of Charlottesville and they shout in front of the cameras, "Jews will not replace us." Blood and soil. These are Nazi slogans. Michael Shapiro, who's here this evening as well, your resident composer and conductor, hi Michael, who knows a lot about Germany, will tell you, blood and soil, Jews will not replace us, are drawn from Nazi language. So Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, now Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're in your face. We don't like Jews. You're malevolent. You're evil. You're behind every plot in the world. But when it comes to the left, it's a little bit more like, let's call it sarin gas. By the time you feel it, it's late in the day. Because they don't go marching down the street saying, "Replace the Jews, blood and soil, Heil Hitler." They talk about globalize the Intifada from the river to the sea. And they have, forgive me, useful Jewish idiots. Including some who endorsed Zohran Mamdani and circled around him with this mantra, as a Jew. Suddenly they're Jewish. Bernie Sanders, who's the only Jew from, whose family is the only Jews from Poland who ever spoke about his family as Polish immigrants, as opposed to Jewish refugees from Poland. All of a sudden, they're Jews. Brad Lander, Jerry Nadler, Ruth Messenger, Jamie Raskin. All of a sudden now, the Jew in them is crying out to encircle and defend Zohran Mamdani in what is called suicidal empathy, to your point. But Jews tend to feel more comfortable on the center left than the center right. And Jews get caught in this quagmire of, well, he says he wants to fight anti-Semitism, says Mamdani, but he doesn't like Israel, so I'll give him a little bit of space, or I'll wait and see and hope. Failure of imagination, hope. And with Islamists, the fear of being labeled an Islamophobe. The great fear in American and liberal democratic societies is the fear of being called racism, in this case Islamophobic, and it's a brilliant strategy, I hate to say it, but it shuts down any attempt at serious scrutiny, not of Islam as a religion, but of those who invoke Islam, whether Boko Haram, ISIS, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Iran, go down the list, in order to murder, kidnap, conquer. And yet people are afraid. My very last point, unless you keep the doors locked. So what do you take away from this evening? And I will say very frankly that if there are no takeaways that endure till tomorrow morning, then with love and respect, we failed. My goal was not to spend a wonderful hour and a half with new and old friends from Chappaqua and the surrounding area and simply promote the book, though I hope you'll, before leaving, you'll meet me and pick up a copy. My goal in life for the last 50 years has been to mobilize people, Jews and non-Jews alike. Jews, to your point, it begins in the home. It doesn't begin with Jewish organizations. It begins in the home. My appeal to fellow Jews is be more Jewish. Do more Jewish. And I say it as a very pluralistic Jew. Do not succumb and become a Marrano Jew. Do not take the mezuzah off the door, put it on. Do not postpone the trip to Israel with your family. Take the trip to Israel. Do not quake in fear of going to a synagogue or a Jewish meeting for security reasons. Show up, chin up, spine firm. The days of apologetic Jews with trembling knees is over. So one of my answers to Zohran Mamdani is I'm going to be more Jewish, do more Jewish. I'm going to make sure that the Israeli flag is seen from our window, that the Chanukiah is seen from our window, that our grandchildren, 3 of whom speak Hebrew, never fear to speak Hebrew in the streets, etc., etc., etc. That's number one. Even before we get Dr. Glassman to the organizations, it begins in the home. And then those of you who are members of synagogues, if your rabbis aren't standing tall and firm and not just teaching you tikkun olamism, important though that is, but Judaism and Zionism, then talk to them. Talk to them. When we sent our children to Hebrew school up here, after bar mitzvah, I remember one coming back at age 16, your friend, Deb. I said, Daniel, what did you learn today? He said, I learned the evils of drunk driving. I called the rabbi who was my friend and I said, David, I'm scared to death of drunk driving, especially in these parts, wintertime, nighttime. That's not why he goes to Temple Sharei Tefillah. I want him to understand the pride, the enrichment, the life map, the GPS system for why being a Jew is enriching. It's not better than any other pathway, but it's a fulfilling identity for those of us who have it. For the non-Jews, move from bystanders to, as they say, upstanders. In the year 2002, January, Horace Greeley High School held an assembly. Some of you may have heard me say this before. It was after 9/11, and it was an effort to explain Islam to 1,000 very young, impressionable kids, some of whose families had been touched directly by 9/11. It went off the rails. Greeley meant well, but they picked one family from Chappaqua that used the opportunity in the auditorium of Greeley to teach the kids how to repeat Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. This was not only after 9/11, but during the Second Intifada, when the sisters of my wife living in Israel and their families were hearing Allahu Akbar just prior to a bus being blown up, a pizzeria being blown up, a discotheque being blown up, and hearing as well that the concentration camps for Jews were no different than the incarceration of Japanese Americans, shameful as that was, and the evils of America. And we wrote a letter to the school board afterwards. My wife was actually in the auditorium. And we went to just about every family we knew in Chappaqua and said, will you sign this with us? It's a very respectful, diplomatic letter. It was not antagonistic to the family or the school. It simply said, these issues are way more complicated, and you need a variety of perspectives, and the students were not well served. Not one single friend of ours that we asked, not one, in Chappaqua was willing to sign. Not one. Jewish or non-Jewish, not one. The explanation, the whispered, we agree with you. The fear, college, this mishugas, college references, transcripts, grades in class, our bubula, they may suffer. I can assure you. First, the school board voted 7-0 to chastise the school for the way it conducted it, just based on our letter. And secondly, yes, our children did go to college. They actually did, despite their parents' best efforts to keep them out. We need upstanders who understand that anti-Semitism begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. It's an attack on the fabric of liberal democracy. It's an attack on the fabric of pluralism. It's an attack on the fabric of the protection of minorities. It's an attack on the protection of equal rights and equal opportunities for all. And I'll end with this as the illustration. By the end of 1967, the Jews of Libya were gone. 0. From 40,000, sounds like Uganda, to 0. Those who weren't killed managed to escape. Fast forward. Remember the image of Jihadi John? Jihadi John, who collected not Jews in Libya. He couldn't find them. Who did he collect? Christians. Who did he blindfold with his partners kneeling on the beach, videoing it? By the way, the Nazis tried to hide their crimes, especially when it became clear they were going to lose the war. They had a special unit to hide all the evidence of the crimes. They're videoing it, just like Hamas did on October 7th. Look how many Jews we killed. Look at how many Jews we raped. Christians beheaded by Jihadi John and his colleagues. My takeaway message, all people of goodwill who believe in the pillars of liberal democracy, whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish, whether their favorite people are Jews or not Jews is irrelevant. We're all in this boat together. 6 million Jews were killed. At least 54 million non-Jews were killed because of one raging anti-Semite. If we're in this together, let's act together. Let's stand together. Let's speak together. When Asians are expelled in Uganda, our voices need to be loud and clear. And when Jews are attacked and killed as Jews, and in the last 7 years in this country, more Jews have been killed as Jews than from 1654 to 2018, which I believe is 164 years. Process that. The last 7 years alone, more Jews have been killed as Jews, whether in Boulder, whether in San Diego, whether in Chicago, whether in Rockland County, whether in Jersey City, whether at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. Shall I keep going? Something is going off the rails here. And it may be the Jews who are the first targets. We're not the only targets. And the purpose of my book and the purpose of my being here is to mobilize. Let's all become upstanders for one another. Then this meeting will have had a purpose.
David, thank you for giving us this book, a work that not only documents the persistence of anti-Semitism, but also which challenges us to confront it with clarity and courage. As a refugee, I know how displacement and false narratives can uproot lives and fracture communities, but I also know the power of welcome and belonging to restore dignity. Tonight's conversation reminds us that silence is never neutral. The measure of our society will not be how we remember hatred, but in how we boldly choose to write a different story of courage and compassion.
I'm Piper Van Scoik.
On behalf of the Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee and the Enough Students Club, we present David Harris with the Certificate of Appreciation for sharing your insights and expertise on anti-Semitism, with the Newcastle community. Thank you so much.
I'm Piper Van Scoik.
I'm Hannah Fishman.
And I'm Rebecca Fishman. Thank you, Mr. Harris and Dr. Joshi, for your powerful conversation tonight, which calls us to see anti-Semitism for what it is, to name it what it appears, and to take action against it, not only for Jewish people, but for the dignity and safety for all people. Let's leave here tonight committed to stand together, speak out, and build a future where acceptance is stronger than hate.
As we conclude tonight, we are excited to share that we will be holding our Human Rights Day program on Thursday, December 4th at 7 p.m. here at the Chappaqua. The program is called Letters from Anne and Martin and is a 40-minute, two-person performance followed by a talkback with the audience to discuss the parallels between Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. and how we can learn from their examples to combat intolerance today. Please see the posters in the lobby for more information.
Before you leave tonight, we wanted to remind you that Mr. Harris will be selling and signing his books in the small conference room off the lobby. If you are interested in purchasing and or having Mr. Harris sign a book, please use the exit to my right and form a line along the hallway outside the conference room. Everybody else, please use the other exit to my left. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We are grateful for your support.